Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined on this Thursday morning by Pat Fitzmaurice and by Andrew Erickson. Fellas, it's our starts and sits and waiver ads and touchdown calls show. Quick reminder for everyone, all of our weekly consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Fitz, before we jump into the show, now that we are 4 weeks in, formerly that was a quarter of the season. It's not anymore now with week 17. But now that we are roughly a quarter of the season in, we have a month under our belts. Are there any sort of macro level takeaways that you find yourself thinking about?
Oh, man. Yeah. So I'm pretty open to the zero RB strategy and the hero RB strategy. And one of the foundational principles of those strategies are like, the injury rates are higher at running back generally than they are at wide receiver. That has not been the case at all this year. Wide receivers are dropping like flies, and we have not yet had that running back who everyone wants to bid 90% of their fab budget on yet, because we have not had like a major injury. Like Isaiah Pacheco was a big injury, but we didn't know quite how to play that one. So yeah, I mean, it's not great probably if you are a hero or zero running back advocate, because it just like there haven't been, you're counting on players to bubble up from the reserve running back tier, and that really hasn't happened all that much this season.
Yeah, I guess Jordan Mason would be one of the prime examples after week 1 if he was available, but he wasn't really available in any of my leagues. So It's not like he was as widespread as some of those guys that kind of come out of nowhere, to your point, or all of a sudden become, very viable starting guys. What about you, Erickson? Any kind of macro level takeaways through a month?
I guess I'll piggyback on Fitz's point where it just may not have happened yet, right? And what you're starting to see in some of these leagues is Trey Benson hitting the waiver wire. Oh, James Conner, he looks good. He's going to be fine. He's going to be good to go. Ty Chandler hitting the waiver wire. Aaron Jones looks spry. We're 4 weeks in. These guys are on pace for over 300 touches. That's not going to sustain for the entire season. So don't feel overconfident that running back that you got at a great value in round 6, 7, because all the receivers were getting drafted first. I don't want to look at them as like ticking time bombs, but there is a time limit on some of these players where, hey, maybe it makes opportunity. We talked about this on the trade show. Maybe it makes an opportunity to sell high on a guy like James Conner, like an Aaron Jones, because they're being really productive right now because they're healthy, because the season has just started. So those are some things to keep in mind, that yes, the RB injuries haven't hit yet for the most part, but I don't think that we're quite out of the woods just yet.
You're not telling people to pick up Trey Benson, are you? Like, I'm not sure he's even number 2, and his 50 yards last week were just complete garbage time. That was a garbage time smorgasbord. Like, I don't know if Trey Benson is any good. So I'm not opposed to
based
people.
on in the NFL for 4 games.
Well, just based on him like not being able to get that number 2 job when it was wide open for him, and we remember that less than ringing appraisal Jonathan Gannon had of him during training camp, where it just sounded like he was kind of disappointed with what he had seen from Benson so far. So I don't know if he's a clean handcuff right now, Erickson.
So you would go after DeMarcado instead of Trey Benson?
No, just because there's ambiguity there, I'm not going after either guy.
Okay.
Let's jump into our we'll start with our waiver wire ads as we usually do, starting or sitting in week 5. Let's start with Fitz, one of your guys in Green Bay. Dontayvion Wicks had a nice game. We obviously now have an injury to Christian Watson. We have Jordan Love back, even though it took a quarter or two for him to really seem like he was getting going in the offense. Again, also facing a tough defense. But Dontayvion Wicks had a good game and now a bit more opportunity, we might think, there. So he was one of the more popular pickup off waivers this week. What do you think about Wicks for week 5 specifically?
I think he's very much in play. Christian Watson has the high ankle sprain, even though they're calling it a mild high ankle sprain. I don't know if there really is such a thing. Wicks had 200 air yards last week. That led all NFL wide receivers for week 4, and he finished with 5 catches, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. And now he's going up against a Rams pass defense that ranks 31st in DVOA and has given up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. The Packers' target distribution is pretty uneven, or can be uneven week to week. I mean, Jaden Daniels is going to get his, but then it's going to be Romeo Doubs, Dontayvion Wicks, Tucker Kraft. We might even see some Bo Melton targets this week. Melton's a pretty good number 5 receiver for the Packers and really, really fast. Also, the Green Bay passing game was totally turbocharged last week when they fell behind 28-0. So I don't know if we can count on the sort of volume we saw last week, but still, the matchup is good. The role is enhanced for Wicks. I've got him ranked wide receiver 30 this week. I think he's a pretty good bet.
Erickson, he is also wide receiver 30 in ECR and half PPR, or our overall consensus rankings. Where do you have him, and do you think he's a start in week 5?
I have him in that range, and I think he's a great start, especially if you needed a player, a wide receiver 3 or a flex play. I feel way more confident playing Wicks than I think the next guy we're actually going to talk about here, or any of these replacement level running backs. I don't want to play Cam Akers again, even if Joe Mixon misses another week. We've seen this experience through 2 weeks. Started him the first time. He scored the receiving touchdown. We got bailed out. Last week wasn't great. This week, yes, it's the Buffalo Bills. Their run defense got destroyed by Derrick Henry. Cam Akers, love the man. He's not Derrick Henry. We've seen the Texans offense kind of struggle. So for me, I think Wicks is a player that I want to get in my lineup. I think he's a ton of upside, and Fitz alluded to how great the matchup is this week. You'd be starting Christian Watson. Would you be thinking twice about starting Christian Watson in this matchup against the Rams? Probably not. So Wicks potentially in a even better role with Watson. We'll see how the splits are with Bo Melton potentially playing a little bit more as well. But I love Wicks this week.
Another player that was picked up a lot, Trey Sermon. This one obviously only really applies if Jonathan Taylor is sitting in week 5, didn't practice on Wednesday with that ankle issue. So Erickson, Trey Sermon, is he somebody that you're starting or sitting in week 5?
I would not like to start him. I think it's really more of a desperation play where, hey, I had Jonathan Taylor. He's not going to play. I have to start a running back too because my league requires I have to start 2 running backs. And then Trey Sermon would get the start for me because I still think that there's going to be some type of committee with him. With Tyler Goodson is the other running back they have there on Indianapolis. The last time we saw the Colts without Zack Moss or Jonathan Taylor, we saw a committee with Sermon and Goodson against the Steelers. Sermon was the lead, 17 carries for 88 yards. Goodson had 11 carries for 69 yards. So I don't think we're going to see Sermon in an 85% snap share role. And when you look at the matchup, how do you beat the Jags? You throw on them. You don't really run the football against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I think Shane Steichen knows that. So given the fact that you could have Joe Flacco under center, given the fact that you're missing your star running back, given the fact that the Jaguars are horrible against the pass, this seems like to me, hey, let's drop back 50 times with Joe Flacco in his rocket arm and let's shred this defense and not necessarily feature Trey Sermon in the running game a lot. So I think that he is a RB3 even with the bye weeks and someone that I'm not excited to play, but if I have to, I will throw him in.
Fitz, what do you think, Trey Sermon, if Jonathan Taylor is out?
Yeah, we don't know how good Trey Sermon is, but then again, I had questions about how good Zach Moss was last year, and then he absolutely smashed early in the season when Jonathan Taylor was on IR. I don't know if we're going to get any sort of repeat of that. Right now, I've got him ranked as a high-end running back 3, running back 25. But opportunity often means more than talent at running back. And, he's going to get opportunity. Granted, the one thing the Jaguars do pretty well is stop the run. Although they have given up the 3rd most receiving yards to running backs so far this season, it doesn't look like a great spot for Trey Sermon. But if you give any running back 14 or 15 carries, they have a chance to turn in a pretty usable fantasy day. So it's a bye week. You might have little choice but to start him. If so, I mean, I think you can feel okay about the floor. Not great, but okay. Not sure if you're going to get a smash game, but he's usable this week.
One more running back that was a big waiver wire pickup this week, Fitz. Kareem Hunt. This is somebody that some folks are picking up in anticipation even earlier, when he was Chiefs practice squad. Obviously, not a good game for Carson Steele this past week. So maybe it'll be Kareem Hunt's turn to really solidify a lead in this backfield. I mean, we'll see how it ends up playing out. Obviously, no Rashid Rice either. So more opportunity to go around in the Chiefs offense to some degree. Kareem Hunt, are you starting him in week 5 if you have him?
Yeah, reluctantly. I've got him ranked a little ahead of Sermon at running back 23 or 24. Pour one out for Carson Steele season. That didn't last very long. 14 carries for Kareem Hunt last week, 69 yards, only 7 combined carries for Samaje Perine and Carson Steele. It is possible this turns into a messy committee because now we might see Clyde Edwards-Helaire activated this week. So as of now, though, you have to favor, I think, the guy who got it done for the Chiefs last week. And maybe the lead guy in this committee might have significant value just because you have to figure the Chiefs offense is going to be more RB-centric now that Rashid Rice is going to miss some time.
Yeah, Erickson, what do you think? Hunt did have 14 carries in week 4, 69 yards. He clearly was leading the backfield in last week's matchup.
I think if you added him, you had some confidence that he would be the lead guy moving forward. So I am skeptical that he's going to be the Chiefs RB1 for the rest of the season. I think this could just be an entire mess. But if you added him, especially, ahead of the Carson Steele horrible game this past week, I would take advantage of it. Don't waste these opportunities, especially where the Chiefs, again, they're going into a bye week in week 6. So they may try to figure things out and how they actually want to deploy this backfield at the highest level when they come out of their bye week. But for now, it seems, hey, let's just roll with Kareem Hunt one more week. He looked okay last week. Again, he's an older running back. I'm not expecting him to rip off like these massive runs. And you have Saints defenses. Okay. Again, it's not a great matchup, not the worst matchup in the world for running back. So again, he's on the Chiefs offense. Unless you think that this Chiefs offense just totally crumbles against the Saints, I think that Hunt has good touchdown upside. I'm not convinced that Pirine scored that touchdown last week just kind of by circumstance. Like Hunt had ripped off a couple big plays, and then they put Pirine and he just ended up scoring. So I think that the goal line back still would be Kareem Hunt, but I'll also not be surprised if we look up Monday night and somehow Carson Steele is back. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is playing more. I don't know. But I would say that I think that he's my highest ranked Chiefs running back. And if I picked him up, spent valuable waiver wire money on him, I would try to play him.
Let's plant our flags on some players for week 5. Fitz, who is your guy this week?
It's Xavier Legette, a Carolina Panthers receiver not named Deontay Johnson. Legette looked good last week. I watched a lot of that Panthers-Bengals game. Legette had 10 targets, 6 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Could have been an even better day, but he did have one kind of bad drop, and there was a play where it looked like it could have gone for a long gain, but Andy Dalton underthrew him just a bit. Legette is 6'1" and 220 plus pounds and has 4.39 speed. Like, he is an athletic freak. And I thought he looked pretty good running his routes last week. And this dude's really dangerous after the catch. So he had a great matchup against the Bengals last week that he took advantage of. Not as good a matchup against the Bears this week, but I'm still betting Legette has a pretty nice week. I think he's got a foothold in this passing game now, and I'm anxious to see more.
Erickson, where do you have Legette ranked?
I think I have him in the wide receiver 3 range. Wide receiver. I mean, I think that he's a start. Flex play, especially with the bye weeks. I like Wicks more, but when people were asking me about, hey, who should I add off the waiver this week? It was usually Wicks, and then Legette was the next guy I would point out to for wide receivers. So, Deontay is on the injury report again, this time with a different injury. I think he should be okay, but if he's hampered in any way, we've seen Deontay not necessarily play the greatest through injuries before. So you could see even more funnel of targets towards Legette in this matchup.
Who are you planting your flag on, Erickson?
Well, I'm glad that Fitz talked about volume for running backs that maybe aren't the greatest being good fantasy producers. So I'm going with the king of that, Najee Harris, right? So he is top 10 this season so far in total touches. He is top 10 in terms of total yards from scrimmage, 78 per game. His touches and yards are very close to Kyren Williams, who we're all looking at as a top 5, no doubt, starting running back. The main difference between the two guys is Kyren Williams has 6 touchdowns and Najee has 0, right? That's really been Najee's bugaboo, is he just can't find the end zone. And he's done this every single year, where he just starts at the gates, never scores, and then in the second half of the year, he usually picks up those touchdowns. So I am betting on this particular matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. Again, horrible run defense. They don't have Patterson. They don't have Jaylen Warren. I mean, if Najee can't get it done in this match, I don't know what we're doing. I didn't want to draft Najee. I like Jaylen Warren, but all the circumstances are pointing to, hey, this is a great spot for Najee Harris to deliver. So I really had trouble putting him as my flag plant because I'm looking near him saying, Najee Harris is my flag plant this week. And I'm like, yep, I'm just going to roll with it, baby. So yeah, if you have Najee, I think you got to start him because I think the matchup's too good. The volume is there. The opportunities are there. And eventually he's going to find the end zone. So I'm going with Najee.
I'm just going to say this the last time that we said something to the effect of, if this guy can't get it done this week in this matchup, then what are we doing here? Was Zamir White against the Panthers, and he had 10 carries for 34 yards.
Well,
so
we also said it about DeAndre Swift, and he did get it done the next week after he faced the Colts, who Najee just faced.
On those, got to get it done this week, guys. We'll see.
I mean, in fairness, Swift and Harris are much more proven assets in their careers than Zamir White. Zamir White's he played 4 good games at the end of last year, so.
Of course. It was just the first thing that came to mind when you said that.
You're not wrong. I'm trying to justify the take.
Yeah. Fitz, what are you doing with Najee Harris?
Yeah, I mean, I've got him running back 17. It wasn't really encouraging that he kind of got stuffed by the Colts last week, but maybe the Colts' run defense is not a patsy anymore. I mean, they gave up over 150 rushing yards to Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs the first 2 weeks, but the last 2 weeks, they've kind of stuffed DeAndre Swift and Najee Harris. So maybe the Colts have figured it out on defense. But so, yeah, the volume is going to be there, especially with Warren and Cordero Patterson banged up. I don't love it that the Steelers have so many injuries on their offensive line. But you know who else is running behind an injury-riddled offensive line? Kyren Williams, who Erickson just mentioned, and he has 6 touchdowns. So I do think the touchdown luck is bound to even out for Najee. And yeah, in a week like this with buys and, if some guy's banged up, I think you have to put him in your lineup.
After the game, the Zaire Franklin was actually calling Najee Harris soft too. So, I mean, this guy he's got to put up a shot. Like, he needs to show up in this particular matchup. So.
Has Najee ever missed a game?
Basically, he was saying that Cordell Patterson was a bigger threat than Najee was. And in that particular game, Patterson did look better, but when I rewatched it, Najee had nowhere to run. There was nowhere for him to go. And he did at least look okay on that one reception he had at the end of the game that really kind of saved his bacon when it came to just his total yards from scrimmage. But I think he's got a lot to prove, especially they got to lean on him in this matchup.
Maybe this week Najee Harris will get a TD, tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6. Whatever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure, touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or defense, we don't care how they score them. We just want to bet on touchdowns. And DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many touchdowns will be in a game. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app to make your pick. Week 5 does have some standout games. I'm interested in Jets-Vikings in London, with Minnesota laying 2.5 points. Ravens-Bengals, the Ravens laying 2.5 points also. The clear best game on the slate is Bills-Texans. Houston is laying just a single point in that one, with the total set at 47.5. That's up from 46.5 earlier in the week. That game could be an instant classic if Josh Allen and CJ Stroud are at their best. Lines and odds are subject to change on those matchups. Of course, ready to do a touchdown dance of your own. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, guys, let's get into some start-sit player debates. We will start, as always, with the running backs. We're going to start with a couple of bigger names here because I thought this was an interesting one given how these guys have looked lately, given how their offenses respectively have looked lately. Travis Etienne versus Devon Achane. And these are 2 guys, Erickson, you really liked Etienne, during the summer. Fitz, you really liked Achane during the summer, and they've had moments this year, but they've also, had down moments as well. Erickson, let's start with you. Who do you like better for week 5, Etienne or Achane?
I have the rank back-to-back, so I could probably go either way. I think my lean is towards Etienne just because I think I have a little bit more faith in Jacksonville's offense moving the ball against the Colts. With Miami, we've seen the last 2 weeks without Tua, they just have not been functional. And when you look at Achane, the way that he's being used, get this guy out in space. I don't understand why they keep running up the gut with an offensive line that can't create any type of push. So I guess, too, I'm looking at game environments, right? Which game do you think could score more fantasy points altogether? Colts and Jaguars or Patriots Dolphins, which just screams to me 10-7. That's the game that I'm foreseeing in my mind happening because I'm going to have to be forced to watch it because it's going to be the only game on in my market. So I think just from a game environment perspective, I think I lean towards Etienne, but it is really close. So I'm interested to see what side Fitz is on.
Yeah, Fitz, what do you think?
That's a really interesting point about the game environment. And, I agree that Jaguars Colts looks a little bit better for scoring than Dolphins Patriots, which is just darn near an unwatchable football game. I'm still going to go with Achane, and I know the Miami offense is just completely gross at this point. Not even just the quarterback thing, but Miami's offensive line is not anywhere close to what it was last year, at least in the running game. But Achane is clearly the Dolphins' lead back, and he has the speed to break a long gain on any given touch. Tank Bigsby now is a pretty firm foothold in the Jaguars offense. Like I'm worried about that if I'm an Etienne investor. Etienne has not had more than 13 carries in any game this season. And last week he played a season low 52% snap share. So not only is Travis Etienne becoming a platoon back, but he's a platoon back in a bad offense. So I'm still going to go with Achane, because I think he has become sort of the lead back in Miami. Even if we see the return of Raheem Mostert, I think Achane's going to get like a clear majority of the touches this week.
And these guys are both inside the top 18, both in our staff rankings and in ECR with rankings from across the industry. But I thought it was worth bringing them up because you see those names, and if you're thinking at it from the framework of how we were drafting these guys, it's no doubt about it, like very obvious. These are big names that you're going to start week in and week out. But, they're not only, what did I think it was interesting to put them against each other, but they're behind names like Chuba Hubbard and, James Conner and Brian Robinson Jr., who are players that we like, but just who in draft season you never would have considered ranking ahead of guys like Etienne and Achane. And here we are, again, do somewhat to how Etienne is being used, do somewhat to what the offense looks like around Etienne. But it's interesting. They're in that range where you're probably starting them depending on your roster, but it's worth considering other options. I mean, it's justifiable to do that. Erickson, are there any other names that you think, like, I just want to, because they're such big names, are there other names that you, like, it might surprise people that you would have ahead of these guys?
No, I mean, I think the names you threw out were appropriate. I originally had Ramondre up there, but I need to adjust that based on his potential benching for Antonio Gibson. So I will adjust that in the ranks. But Najee, I mean, I feel comfortable about his volume in this particular matchup. So I could see him as a potential option over those guys. I think that you hit the nail on the head where you just feel better about some of these other offensive environments. I'd rather bet on the Panthers offense at this point. With Andy Dalton, that offense looks better, which is why I think Chuba Hubbard is a better option than those other two players. So those are only some of the names that I'm looking at least when I'm looking at my rankings right now.
Let's go to our next running back debate. Fitz, I'll start with you here. It's a couple of guys in the same backfield. We've talked about them head-to-head before, but it continues to be an interesting discussion, I think. I mean, Chase Brown versus Zach Moss are the names. Moss is still ranked ahead in our ECR rankings. He's RB23 in half PPR. Chase Brown RB27. Brown has just been more explosive and looks better though. And we're still kind of waiting to see if that usage is going to change this week, going up against a very stout Ravens defense. We talked about with Erickson a bit on the Tuesday show how a guy like Chase Brown might be more likely to break a long one against this defense. Again, the rankings still have Moss a few spots higher. Who do you like better in this backfield in week 5?
This is a tough one for me, Worm. You know what a big Chase Brown fan I am. We talked about him a lot in the offseason. So I was obviously very excited by what we saw last weekend with the 2 touchdowns, 15 carries for 80 yards. And both of those Chase Brown touchdowns came inside the 10-yard line. So I would have figured that's where Zach Moss would be in the game. I think Chase Brown is better than Zach Moss, possibly a lot better. The air just crackles with electricity when Chase Brown has the ball in his hands. But here's the thing. Zach Moss has been pretty good too. Like, he's only averaging 3.9 yards per carry, but it's looked better than that YPC suggests. Moss has been a pretty good pass catcher. I can admit that even as the president of the Chase Brown fan club, that Zach Moss has been pretty solid this year. So now I find myself in this awkward position of being the one pumping the brakes on Chase Brown when all the point chasers who saw the 2 touchdowns last year are hitting me up on Twitter asking me if they should trade like DK Metcalf for Chase Brown. And all right, maybe not DK Metcalf, but like productive wide receivers for Chase Brown, who's still technically the number 2 running back in Cincinnati, and someone I'm just not comfortable giving up like a really good wide receiver for right now. So it would still be Zach Moss for me over Chase Brown this week. I mean, he played at least 60% of the snaps in each of the Bengals' first 4 games. Maybe we'll see a changing of the guard soon, but I don't think it's imminent yet.
Regardless of your preference between these two, are you wanting to start at least, one of these guys if you have them against this Ravens defense, or are you wanting to avoid them given what we've seen specifically out of the rush defense from Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, I've got Chase Brown in the flex zone. Like these guys the Bengals offense has still been pretty good. Like this is a good offense. They're going to be, it's not like you're starting someone from the Jaguars offense where the point expectation is like somewhere between 14 and 20. I expect the Bengals to put up at least 20 points even against good defenses. So they get the backs involved in the passing game. Like I'm okay with starting either of these guys. Like Moss is a low-end RB2 and Chase is more of a flex.
Erickson, what do you think about this one, both in terms of Brown versus Moss, and then also just kind of starting either of them against the Ravens?
So I slightly lean towards Brown here for the reasons that we talked about earlier, Worm. I just think that both guys are going to find it tough to run against the Ravens defense. And Chase Brown showing that red zone usage makes me less confident that, if one of them scores, it will be Zach Moss. I felt very confident about that first 3 weeks of the season. Moss is the goal line back. He'll score. That'll save you if he doesn't have a lot of rushing yards. But that may no longer be the case. I think that in a game where you could see a ton of points, how do the Bengals combat Derrick Henry in this running machine that the Ravens offense is? They got to score points. So maybe they prefer Chase Brown in the juice a little bit more than Zach Moss in this particular matchup. I think it's okay for flex consideration if you're not starting either of them as your RB2. I think I might go the wide receiver route, honestly, than start one of these guys in my flex. I get that the Bengals are a high-powered offense. They should score points here, but I think it's just going to come through the air. I think that they're going to be like, we don't want to run on this Ravens defense, and we don't have to. We have all these weapons. We have Joe Burrow. They have the best offensive line in terms of pressure rate. Joe Burrow is the least pressure quarterback this season. So why run it? Why bite into the Ravens' strength on defense when air show? We can just rip them apart through the air and really not care that much about featuring the running backs. Now they're involved in the passing game to an extent. Who's more likely to take a screen to the house? We all know it's Chase Brown. So for me, it would be Brown, but I think that I would try to look for some better alternatives, especially receivers, maybe with a little more upside than the Bengals running backs.
What do you think about that, Fitz, like looking towards the receivers instead of running backs in this range?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. It is a daunting matchup for sure for either of these backs. So if there is a wide receiver who has a pretty good outlook for at least 4 or 5 catches, I'm on board with that.
I'm really interested just quickly on this matchup. Erickson, you mentioned like Joe Burrow kind of throwing for a lot. I'm really interested to see how he does in this one because early on, like early career Joe Burrow really torched the Ravens. Like he had a game with 500 yards and 4 touchdowns against them at one point. He had a game with 400 yards and 3 touchdowns against them at one point. Like Jamar Chase has had massive games against the Ravens, but Mike McDonald really had his number more recently. It was always a really fascinating matchup, and McDonald tended to get the better of him even in games that the Ravens lost. Just he was holding Burrow to more like 215 yards, 217 yards, 222 yards. Those some of the recent, totals he's had, 183 yards. So I'm really curious to see now that they had the change at defensive coordinator. Do we see that continue and Zach Orr kind of learning things from Mike McDonald and having sort of the key to slowing down Joe Burrow in this passing game? Or will this be kind of back to the pre-McDonald era where Burrow was really having his way with the Ravens secondary? Do you have any kind of expectations on that, Erickson?
I would. They're going to try to throw the ball. I'm very convinced of that. And if you give Joe Burrow time in the pocket, which based on how great the offensive line has played, he's the least pressured quarterback this season. I think that he's going to shred. And there's only so many things a defense can do in the secondary when we're not getting pressure, sending 4 guys. Maybe they blitz him, but then that creates a lot of chunk plays. You see how better this offense is when T. Higgins plays and teams can't double Jamar Chase. That's how you get Jamar Chase with these massive explosive plays. Yes, he doesn't see as many targets, but he's so efficient on the targets he does get because it's always in favorable looks. So I think we're going to get points in this game. And really, if you're the Bengals, how do you beat Derrick Henry and the Ravens is you don't have him on the field and you make the Ravens have to play catch up. So I expect the Bengals to be really aggressive throwing the football.
Yes, same question, Fitz. I just find it so funny that in all of his games against the Ravens, he's either had under 225 passing yards or over 400. There's been no like high 200s, low 300s, just quality good game. It's either amazing or pretty poor.
And I remember one of those big games where I was in a dynasty championship game and T. Higgins unleashed holy hell on me. And I lost this game where I was probably a big favorite. So yeah, like I do expect that the Bengals are probably going to be pass heavy in this one. So like, I wouldn't worry too much about the matchup. I think Joe Burrow is very much in play as a starter this week. Higgins, too, got a lot of first read looks for the Bengals last week. Yeah, we might see points in this game. Like, I know the Ravens are a really good defensive team, but this could be a slugfest.
You can't forget Eric All. Lock in those 4 catches. I mean, if you just want 4 catches on your tight end slot, Eric All, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. Let's go to some wide receiver debates. Let's start with DJ Moore against Brandon Aiyuk. Erickson, I'll start with you here. Who do you prefer between Moore and Aiyuk in week 5?
It's going to be Brandon Aiyuk for me. I don't think that he is washed in any way, shape, or form. I think he's just getting back to his old self after so much missed time in the offseason. If we have players, these receivers are in crowded receiver rooms, right? You have the Bears, DJ Moore, you have Keenan Allen, you have the running backs catching passes, Rome Odunze. Kind of same thing with the 49ers where you have Debo, you have Kittle, Juwan Jennings. Who do I want to attach myself to offensively? I want to attach myself to Brock Purdy's receiver because we know it's going to happen for Aiyuk eventually. DJ Moore, it should happen, but with Caleb Williams as his quarterback, the likelihood that it happens in this particular week, again, matchups aside, I'm just going to push my chips in on Brandon Aiyuk. So it's Aiyuk for me.
Fitz, what do you think? Because the matchups, I mean, it is the Cardinals for the 49ers and then the Panthers for the Bears. Does that kind of help shape your decision here, Fitz?
Yeah, I mean, stiff target competition for both guys. Both guys off to slow starts. Maybe you just go with the matchup here and Aiyuk and the better quarterback. But I don't know. Like, I'm not into vibes-based analysis, but the vibes on Aiyuk are just not good these days. And I'm a little worried about it. And this is a guy
is DJ Moore's vibes good though? I feel like his vibes are really bad too with Caleb. I feel like his body language is horrible every time Caleb throws in the ball.
That's true. And he's averaging 5.6 yards per target. So I'm not going to try to tell you that things have been great for DJ Moore. But at the same time, Erickson, we have seen DJ Moore thrive in like unhealthy offensive ecosystems before. So I kind of feel like this is a better ecosystem than he dealt with in some of those years in Carolina when he was still churning out like 1,100-yard seasons. So I'm still pretty confident in Moore. I actually do think he's the better player. And Aiyuk was never going to repeat his 2023. It was always silly that he was being drafted as like a low-end wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2 when he averaged 6.6 targets a game and barring any sort of major injury to one of the other 49ers pass catchers, didn't really have any prospect of increasing his target share. So he just had that freak efficiency where he was averaging, 12.8 yards per target last year. That was never going to repeat. So I thought the whole premise of Aiyuk being a top pick this year was sort of flawed. I just rather have DJ Moore.
They've both definitely gotten off to slow starts, like you mentioned, Fitz. DJ Moore through 4 weeks is wide receiver 34 in half PPR scoring. He's directly behind names like Ladd McConkey, Trey Tucker, Jakobi Meyers, Quentin Johnston. But Brandon Aiyuk is down at wide receiver 61 through the first 4 weeks. He's behind names like Michael Wilson, Rashad Bateman, Ray McLeod. So, I mean, they've both been slow, but Aiyuk has been worse to date so far this season, Erickson.
I just want the guy that Brock Purdy's throwing the ball to. Purdy's balling out. I mean, Purdy throws 5 touchdowns against the Cardinals. Is anyone going to be surprised? No. So, again, up at the number 1 top is Juwan Jennings, right? Imagine if that was Brandon Aiyuk. I just think there's more offensive production to squeeze from the 49ers than there is in the Bears offense. So that's kind of why I lean towards Aiyuk.
Let's go to another wide receiver debate. I'll start with you, Fitz. Jaxon, Smith-Njigba against Rashid, Shaheed. Who do you prefer in week 5?
Give me Shaheed. Like, he is not just a field stretcher anymore. He's running more of a full route tree this year. And he still does get a lot of those high value targets downfield, though. His average depth of target, 14.5 yards. So he is going to deliver big plays. The other appealing thing about the Saints, they don't really have a legitimate number 3 wide receiver. Sorry, Mason Tipton. It's Olave, it's Alvin Kamara, it's Rashid Shaheed, and that's pretty much it in this offense. I want to wrap my arms around Jaxon Smith-Njigba so badly, but what if it turns out that he is just like a really good possession receiver? Because I'm not seeing the promise that he showed when he was a 19-year-old sophomore, catching 95 passes and putting up 1,600 yards, sharing a field with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson at Ohio State. Like, you would think a season like that would portend stardom for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, but we're a quarter of the way into his second NFL season, and we're just not getting many big plays. We're not getting many touchdowns. He's averaging 6.8 yards per target, which was the same yards per target he had last year. He's getting more catches this year and more targets, but he's averaging just 9 yards per catch. There's just not a lot of sizzle when he has the ball in his hands. Maybe this is just the start of a career where JSN does become like a more athletic version of Keenan Allen, and he's like this extraordinary possession receiver. But maybe he's just a more athletic version of Tyler Boyd. That's what I'm worried about at this point. So I'm going to go with Mr. Big Play here, Rashid Shaheed.
Erickson, do you have similar concerns? I mean, these two guys couldn't have been more different in their usage so far this season in terms of the big play versus possession receiver stuff. They're back-to-back in ECR, wide receiver 32 and wide receiver 33. How do you see it?
So I like the JSN side, but it's less about me being, oh, JSN is so good, I'm so pro JSN. It's about Shaheed in this particular matchup. So I'm a slave to Shaheed in zone man splits because it has not led me down the wrong road yet. Basically, you want to play him against defenses that run a lot of zone. That's when he's had his biggest game so far throughout his career. And so far this season, Chiefs ranked 28th in zone coverage. So for me, this doesn't profile as a quote unquote Shaheed week. I do think that his floor is much higher than it has been in years past, given the different usage and how he is used a little bit more underneath. So I don't think that it's a feast or famine situation with Shaheed, but I don't think that the ceiling is there. Whereas with JSN, look, the Seahawks want to throw the ball. They are number 1 in pass rate over expectation. They are more than happy to throw the ball again. In this particular matchup against the Giants, I could definitely see where it is a little bit more of the Ken Walker show. But Geno Smith eventually has to throw more touchdowns if he's going to lead the NFL in passing yards. I mean, over the last 3 weeks, he's thrown 1 touchdown in each game. So yes, Jason's not scoring touchdowns, but Geno Smith's not throwing touchdowns. So I think if that regresses, Jason could be one of the benefactors of that. So I think it is close, and maybe if it was a different matchup with Shaheed this week, I would go with him, but I'm going to lean on JSN. He's still seeing a lot of targets in this offense that wants to throw the football, so I will go with JSN.
Guys, low testosterone affects about 30% of adult men in America. Are you feeling the drag of fatigue, noticing a dip in muscle mass, or sensing a slump in libido? If so, it's time to get your testosterone levels tested. If you have low T, Kizotrex is an FDA-approved pill that's changing the game in testosterone replacement therapy. In fact, Kizotrex restored testosterone levels in nearly 9 out of 10 clinical study participants, and its unique formulation bypasses the liver to avoid liver damage. It's time to break free from injections, pellets, and gels. Choose Kizotrex and take a step toward being the hero of your life again. To see if you qualify, visit Kizotrex.com and take the low T quiz today. That's KYZATREX.com. By prescription only, Kizotrex is a controlled substance and can be a target of abuse. Kizotrex is not for use in pregnant women or men with prostate or breast cancer. Safety and efficacy in those younger than 18 is not known. Tell your doctor about all medical conditions and medications. Serious side effects could include increased blood pressure, worsening prostate symptoms, increased risk of prostate cancer, blood clots in the legs or lungs, decreased sperm count, liver problems, enlarged or painful breasts, and breathing problems while you sleep. Common side effects include swelling of the ankles, feet, or body, increased red blood cell count, an increase in prostate-specific antigen or PSA levels. PSA is a test used to detect prostate cancer. Report these symptoms to your doctor. Call your doctor to learn more about Kizotrex. For questions or more information, visit www.kizotrex.com or call 1-800 833-949-5040. All right, guys, let's get into some more rapid fire start sit decisions. I've got another running back one here for you. A couple of guys who are backups on the depth chart, but who have had good games. And one of these guys' cases, some games even better than the starter. Justice Hill for the Ravens and Braelon Allen for the Jets. Erickson, who do you prefer between these two?
Going to hedge. If it's a full PPR, I'm going to go with Justice Hill because I'm confident that he's going to catch a lot of passes. 18% target share this year, which is top 5 among running backs. That was not on my bingo card heading into the season. With Braelon Allen, I think in half PPR, I think he has more touchdown upside because all the touchdowns in the Ravens offense go to Lamar or Derrick Henry. So I think in a half PPR, I'm going to go with Braelon Allen.
Yeah, Fitz, Hill basically tripled up any other Ravens receiver in receiving yards in that Sunday night game against the Bills, and obviously it worked out really well for them. Do you like Hill this week? Do you view it the same way as Erickson in terms of it's dependent on the scoring format?
I actually do. I have Braelon Allen ranked one spot ahead of Hill in half-point PPR, but in full-point PPR, I've got Hill ranked a little bit higher. Neither guy's a comfortable start, though, this week. I mean, they're both complimentary backs playing behind stars, and I know we haven't gotten a star performance out of Breece Hall yet, but I wouldn't sweat it if you're a Breece Hall investor. He'll be fine.
Let's look at another wide receiver start-sit decision. How about Odunze against Jakobi Meyers? Erickson, what do you think here?
I think I'm going with Jakobi Meyers, and I felt a lot better about this before I realized he's playing Denver, and he's going to probably match up a decent amount with Patrick Surtain, but I don't have any confidence with Odunze. He's had one good game with Caleb Williams. I think that against Carolina, they're going to try to run the football a decent amount, and you saw last week when Keenan Allen came back, Odunze's targets got nuked. So I think from a volume perspective, I think Meyers will still see more volume. Again, Surtain is going to be on him a lot, but I don't think it's going to be the entire game necessarily for Jakobi. And Jakobi, he got peppered, man, with opportunities last week with Devontae out. So I think Jacoby's still a really good player. I think he's underrated. I'm so sad that the Patriots let him go for Juju Smith-Schuster. So I'm going to go with Jakobi, but I think that there is a lot of risk still involved because of the bad matchup.
I had forgotten that, not that I had forgotten, but I wasn't thinking about the fact that he used to be with New England. He would be such a nice piece to have for Drake May.
Imagine, right?
That's getting started. Yeah, that is a bummer. And instead, it's Juju who's not even there anymore. Odunze or Jakobi, who do you like better, Fitz?
It's Rome Odunze for me. He was a top 10 draft pick for a reason. This dude is crazy talented. I know that offense and the passing game have not really kicked it into high gear yet. And I know Meyers is basically the de facto number one receiver for the Raiders with Davante Adams sure to be out and has probably played his last game with the Raiders. But yeah, with the matchup against the Broncos and Patrick Surtain, I do not want to be shipwrecked on Patrick Surtain Island. I sunburn easily. I don't like coconuts. So I'm going with Rome Odunze here.
Let's look at some flex options. How about Jerome Ford against Xavier Worthy? I mean, we haven't really talked about on this episode what we talked a bit about the Chiefs' backfield with Kareem Hunt, but with Rashid Rice out, there is an opportunity here for Worthy as well. Do we like him better than Jerome Ford this week, Erickson?
I think I'm going with Ford. I think I like the safety of a player that's seeing, I mean, he's one of the rare running backs that's seeing a 75% or higher snap share. That is super rare with everyone basically turning into running back by committee. So he's basically seeing all the touches in the Browns backfield except for the occasional goal line touch where they'll use Deontay Foreman. So it's a great matchup against the Commanders. The Browns offense actually might put up points this week for a very rare time. And Ford, we don't know how many more games you're going to be able to start him because Nick Chubb is going to be coming back. So as much as I love Worthy, I don't think that this is the week where, oh my God, it's the Worthy explosion. They're going on bye week next week. I think you're going to see his role start to increase. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in 1 week to just put him into that Rashid Rice role. He's going to see all these underneath targets. I think it's going to be a lot of Kelsey early on, and then they're going to get Worthy a little bit more involved. So as appealing and salivating as to think about Worthy with, he's going to get double-digit targets in this game, I'm just going to take the security with Ford in a great matchup with a running back that could see north of 15 touches.
Fitz, I'm curious what you think here. I did want to highlight that I kind of intentionally did one of these with Rome Odunze, another one with Worthy. I know the opportunity is different in these respective offenses, but as we get into October, these kind of first-round rookie receivers who haven't hit the ground running in the same way that Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. did, this is when the calendar shifts to October when I start to kind of look more and more at, okay, is this when is this the time we're going to see the opportunity share start to increase? Again, maybe that opportunity is better for Worthy given what's going on with the other receivers in that room. But I wanted to include some of these rookie receivers and kind of get your opinion on them. So in this case, Ford versus Worthy, what do you think?
This is a really tough one because the production profiles are so different. As Erickson mentioned, like you get that touch certainty with Jerome Ford. Granted, like it's not in a good offense. The Browns have not had 300 yards of offense in any game this season. They do have a good matchup against Washington. It'll be interesting to see which side wins this battle of two, kind of a battle of ineptitude. Although we did see the Commanders kind of stop the Cardinals last week, which was thoroughly unexpected. Worthy, on the other hand, hasn't had more than 5 touches in any game this season. You would have to think that his usage becomes like a little more prolific with Rashid Rice out for the year, but I don't want to make the assumption that he's going to suddenly be getting these double-digit target games like Rashid Rice. I think that's a leap of faith that it would be foolish to make. Ford does give you that touch certainty, even though it's not in a great offense, and the Browns are still without their starting tackles, Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin, neither guy practicing as of Wednesday. Wills has played 1 game this year, Conklin none, and it's really hurt this offense. I think I would play Ford if I were a decided favorite in my matchup and I just wanted to get like a stable floor. But if I were an underdog, I would want to have the haymaker potential of Xavier Worthy in my starting lineup. If it's close to 50-50, maybe a slight lean towards Xavier Worthy.
All right, Fitz, let's stick with you. Another flex decision here. Roschon Johnson versus Jordan Addison. Addison obviously got a touchdown last week. So did Roschon. We're kind of hoping, or at least we had heard about Roschon maybe stepping into a bigger role for the Bears backfield. And then, of course, we saw DeAndre Swift have his best game of the season. Who do you like in week 5, Roschon or Addison?
Addison, not an easy matchup against a tough Jets secondary, but Roschon is the number 2 running back in a Bears running game that has only clicked in one of the first 4 weeks of the season, and that was against the Rams. So I know the Panthers have a bad run defense too. I just don't know if Roschon's going to get enough work to capitalize.
Erickson?
Yeah, with Roschon, you're just praying that they have opportunities at the 5-yard line and they put him in, because that's really what his role is in this Bears offense. So I think just looking at who's the better player, it's clearly Addison over Roschon. So even in a tough matchup, I think I also lean towards the Addison side.
Another flex here. Kareem Hunt is somebody we talked about in the waiver wire segment. I wanted to put him against a specific name for you guys. The name I chose was Josh Downs, who obviously looked pretty good against the Steelers. We know that type of receiver can do well against this Pittsburgh defense historically. I'm curious for this week, and there's some degree of uncertainty there with the quarterback position, but Josh Downs against Kareem Hunt. Erickson, who do you prefer?
So this is another one where I'm going to hedge a little. So I think Hunt has a higher touchdown appeal. So in a half PPR, I feel much better about going with Kareem Hunt, but I just think there's going to be a lot of passing attempts in this offense with the Colts against the Jaguars, especially with Jonathan Taylor potentially out. It does change a little bit if it's Flacco versus Richardson. I think Downs in the full PPR is kind of appealing because I think that he can see a lot of targets in this offense, but it would have to be full PPR, and I would prefer just for this matchup if it is Flacco, but in the half PPR, I do feel much better about Kareem Hunt.
Fitz?
I'm also making this a conditional answer. I'm going with Hunt, and the only way I'm pivoting to Downs is if it's full point PPR and Joe Flacco plays. And I don't want to sound like I'm bagging on Anthony Richardson, because like I am still bullish on Anthony Richardson, but just in terms of passing volume and overall passing output, like Flacco is much better for those receivers than Anthony Richardson is.
The first 4 weeks, I don't think you guys had a single conditional like, oh, in this format, I prefer one guy or the other. And now that's all we're getting this episode, it feels like. I suppose it's good to get more.
It's still actionable advice, though.
Because we're telling people exactly what to do. Context for your answers. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's just funny that we didn't do that at all really in the first month. And now we're highlighting them in different ways. One more flex player here, and this is my fault that we're including him again. I accidentally put Justice Hill into the rundown twice, but I decided to keep it because I wanted to put him up against a receiver. So for the record, even though we already talked about Justice Hill, Erickson, do you like him or Alan Lazard better this week?
Yeah, you accidentally put in 2 Ravens players in the flex consideration.
It was
No
not because
surprise.
he's a Raven. I told you before the show it was difficult to
But
find
you
a
could have
lot of
picked any. You could have
good
repeated
players.
any player. You just happen to repeat a Raven. Just
the reason I was thinking about including him in the first place is because I thought it was really interesting that he had 70 receiving yards last game and has been used in that way, and he's just an interesting player to kind of pick between, particularly in PPR if you want to get conditional with it. But yes, he is also a Raven. That was an accident, though. I didn't mean to include him twice.
We forgive you, Worm. It's okay. I will go with Justice Hill over Alan Lazard. That is my take.
Fitz?
Yeah, 2 Justice Hill lineup questions. Worm, you are the Skylar Thompson of show sheet construction. I'm going to go with Justice Hill as well.
You guys know I'm still reeling from this Orioles postseason elimination, and you are kicking me while I'm down.
Are you a fan of Baltimore sports?
If you think I'm a Ravens homer, you can see in my background on YouTube, it's all Orioles stuff, not Ravens. I am all in on the O's, and that was a very distressing loss to the Royals on Wednesday. So let's not talk about it anymore. Speaking of Kansas City, though, at quarterback, I wanted to include one with Patrick Mahomes because, as we have talked about a bit recently, he has not really performed as a QB1, not just as the QB1, but as a QB1 in fantasy for kind of a long stretch here at this point, kind of a disturbingly long stretch if you are a Patrick Mahomes investor. So I want to throw him up against the guy who's leading the NFL in passing yards, Geno Smith. Fitz, you were all in on Patrick Mahomes during the summer, but as we sit here in week 5, given what we now know about his, receiving core going forward, plus what we've seen out of this offense already, would you rather be starting Patrick Mahomes or Geno Smith?
I'd rather be starting Geno Smith. And when I was all in on Patrick Mahomes, I really thought this offense was going to look a lot different with Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy added into the mix to give the Chiefs the downfield passing game they haven't had since Tyreek Hill left. Obviously, Hollywood Brown isn't going to play all season. Now Rashid Rice is hurt. Like, this is just kind of a disaster here for the Chiefs. Geno's QB8 in fantasy, scoring 18.2 fantasy points a game. And like I said this on our ranking show yesterday, Patrick Mahomes has become sort of the modern day Troy Aikman, a great quarterback who just does not move the needle for fantasy. And this dates back to middle of 2023. Since week 8 of 2023, Mahomes has averaged 15.5 fantasy points a game and has only had one 20-point game. One of the greatest pure passers of all time, and he is not a top 12 quarterback for fantasy. It's just kind of wild. Like, he's QB 16 this year, and I don't see hope for improvement without Rashid Rice.
By the way, just as a quick aside, Fitz, where do you have Mahomes in your dynasty quarterback rankings? Because I am just so curious, like, how much we think what we've seen in the last year or so from him is what we expect to see going forward in terms of his fantasy value.
QB 8. Right now, I have him one spot behind Jordan Love and one spot ahead of Joe Burrow.
Wow. Yeah. It is wild because you watch him play and you're like, this dude is still the best quarterback in football. And then you look at the fantasy finish and it's like, oh, another QB 14 finish. And it's tough to square. What do you think, Erickson, Patrick Mahomes or Geno Smith this week?
Imagine if I said Patrick Mahomes after Fitz just laid out the amazing case to never start him ever again in fantasy. No, it's Geno Smith, of course.
I thought Geno Smith was an interesting one to put against him because, a lot of the names that are around where Mahomes is ranked, I thought it was very unlikely people would have to make that decision. It was a lot of names of guys that were probably drafted as your starter, or if you drafted Mahomes, you probably didn't then also draft like Dak Prescott, who was one spot away from him, or Anthony Richardson is one spot behind him, assuming he plays. So it's a lot of names that you probably didn't have them with Mahomes. Geno Smith, I thought, was one that you maybe drafted as a backup to him, and yet now might be your starter in this week instead of Mahomes himself. So a really interesting situation there. Let's look at a tight end now to wrap things up. Tucker Kraft versus Pat Freiermuth. Fitz, I'll start with you. Kraft, I thought, looked good. And obviously, it's a big boost that Jordan Love is back. Freiermuth hasn't quite been what I was hoping he would be during draft season. And in draft season, we talked a lot about Kraft versus Luke Musgrave, and it just feels like Kraft is the guy there. It feels like we're kind of moving past that debate.
Yeah, Kraft is getting way more snaps than Luke Musgrave, so he is the primary tight end for the Packers. This is a close call for me, where I have Freiermuth ranked one spot higher. I think there's a little bit more usage certainty for Freiermuth, and maybe I'm wrong about that because Kraft is playing a significant role for the Packers. But Freiermuth has had at least 4 catches in every game so far this season, and tight ends are always a big part of Arthur Smith's offenses. So I'm going to go with Freiermuth.
Erickson, Kraft, or Freiermuth?
Go with Tucker Kraft, baby. Just because I'm looking for touchdowns, looking for those tutties, Wormeli, you always talk about on these shows. Look, with Jordan Love at quarterback, Tucker Kraft is averaging 2 red zone targets per game. He leads the NFL with tight ends with 4 red zone targets. That's why all the tight ends are horrible, because no one's targeting them in the red zone except for Tucker Kraft. So I think that the upside is with Tucker Kraft. I agree with Fitz, where Freiermuth is catching 4 balls every single week, but he scored last week. So what are the odds that he scores 2 weeks in a row, where I'm banking on Najee to score a touchdown? I think George Pickens could score touchdowns, the little tease right there. So I'm going to go with Tucker Kraft, and he's my only hope to save all my Mark Andrews teams at this point.
Say goodbye to start-sit dilemmas with FantasyPros Start-Sit Assistant. Within seconds, you'll know exactly who to play for optimal results each and every week. Leveraging insights from numerous experts, the Start-Sit Assistant aligns your lineup decisions with the top minds in fantasy football, giving you a competitive edge. Maximize your lineup's potential with just a few clicks. Head to fantasypros.com/myplaybook and make winning decisions in no time. Let's get into our touchdown calls contest to wrap things up. Erickson, I'll actually start with you because you just teased it. Who's your wide receiver?
It's George Pickens. Somebody in the Steelers offense not named Justin Fields has to score a touchdown on Sunday Night Football. Well, I'll be watching, so please tag me if George Pickens and/or Najee Harris scores a touchdown, because we'll be celebrating together. Pickens, most red zone targets without a touchdown, most receiving yards without a touchdown. Trust in the process, the regression. It has to happen at some point. So George Pickens is my touchdown call this week.
So Erickson had wide receiver. I have running back, and I did put in Brian Robinson Jr. This is before he didn't practice on Wednesday, so that is obviously assuming he is playing. I just want every piece of this offense the way it has been looking so far. James Daniels has been amazing. You can make a case he's in one of the top MVP candidates so far this season, let alone rookie of the year. So with running back, I wanted to go with a guy in an offense that is scoring a lot of touchdowns right now. Obviously, I'll be keeping an eye on the practice reports throughout the week for that one. Fitz, you have tight end this week, the unenviable position of having to pick a tight end.
Yeah, talk about drawing the short straw. Did you guys know there's only one tight end this season who has more than 1 touchdown catch? It's George Kittle. He has 2. That's it.
He hasn't even played all the games.
And he hasn't even played all the games. There have only been 21 touchdowns by tight ends this season. That's barely 5 tight end touchdowns per week. I am going to go with Jake Ferguson. He's getting a lot of targets. The target outlook is slightly enhanced now that Brandon Cooks has already been ruled out for Sunday. Ferguson is going against the Steelers, and the Steelers are one of only 5 teams that have allowed more than 1 touchdown catch to a tight end.
All right, so we've got Jake Ferguson, we've got Brian Robinson Jr., assuming he plays, and we've got George Pickens for this week. Touchdown calls contest. We will roll out on that one. For Erickson and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. Best of luck in week 5, and we'll see you next time.